The For the Region podcast is a way to stay connected with the huge range of different conversations and events that we host across South West Wales. Welcome and thank you for tuning in. We are For the Region, and here we are at the first of our roundtable discussions in the lead up to the Regional Green Economy Conference, which is coming up on Tuesday, the 19th of November. And in the lead up to the Green Economy Conference, we like to host these more informal, smaller panel discussions on a range of different topics, just to whet our appetite for what we might talk about at Swansea Arena for the main event, and to get into some interesting discussion on topics that are close to our heart and really important in thinking about the development of a flourishing and sustainable future for South West Wales. So we've got a really lovely group of panellists for this discussion today, and so I'm really pleased to welcome some experts and activists to the panel. So first of all, we've got Sarah Foster, who is the Community-Led Housing Development Officer at Planed for Pembrokeshire. And we've got Jonathan Hughes, who's the Community-Led Housing Advisor for Cwmpas. And I'm delighted to say we've got Adam Land, who is a board member with Gwyr Community Land Trust, actually making this stuff happen on Gower here in Swansea. And then from Swansea Co-Housing, I'm delighted to be joined by Leonie, Ramondt and Adrian Leicester to talk about co-housing and what their aspirations are here in Swansea. So a panel of advisors, experts and activists, and looking forward to all of your thoughts on community-led housing. So that vision of affordable, sustainable homes in healthy, cohesive neighbourhoods feels a bit like a distant dream in the face of the property market that we live with, and the challenge over land use and access to housing and the affordability of housing, particularly for younger generations looking at where they could live, and particularly in rural areas where we need land-based workers, but we haven't perhaps got housing for them. And then different challenges in urban areas, and a lot of speculation in our housing market means that affordable and safe, comfortable housing has moved out of reach for so many people. And also the way we live in our houses is not sustainable, and many of us are isolated and lonely, not feeling part of welcoming and safe communities, not knowing our neighbours, struggling with our own challenges around childcare and health and caring for older generations on our own or in small family units. Are there alternatives? Are there different ways of building homes, different ways of living together, and different ways of envisaging the kinds of communities that we would like to live in across South West Wales and beyond? I'm really interested to hear about what those different options and solutions might be, and I'm really keen to get into some discussion with colleagues in the room. But I'd love to start on the ground and hear about a community-led housing project that is happening or trying to make itself happen on the Gower Peninsula here in Swansea. And I'd love to hear about the journey that you guys have been on, Adam, and where you're up to, what your vision is and what you're hoping to achieve as someone who is actually trying to take forward a community-led housing project. And let's start there from the ground up. So Adam, tell us about Gwyr Community Land Trust.
Hiya, I'm Adam. I've met quite a few of you before, but for those I haven't, hello. I've been part of Gower for about 4 years. We started in 2020, and we sort of organised a meeting in Mumbles for people that were in housing need, trying to find a solution. We didn't know what it would look like at that stage, and we thought we'd have to hold several meetings and to try and get a group together. But straight away in that room there were 12 families, I think, that were interested, and we sort of had a maybe 6-month period of thinking about what we wanted to do. And I think quite early on decided we needed to be quite specific in what we wanted to achieve. A lot of us had been part of different groups that had tried to get community-led housing projects off the ground, and a lot of them, because the possibilities are endless, had never really focused onto a particular proposal or project. And we decided, the proposal was to build between 10 and 14 houses. They'd all be affordable housing, and there'd be aspects of food growing associated with it, allowing people to live sort of low impact lifestyles. We were quite inspired by the One Planet development policy, but a lot of us worked in jobs that we didn't necessarily want to leave. Like with the One Planet development policy, people can live on the land and run land-based businesses, but a lot of people working in essential jobs, architects, people work in schools, all of that sort of stuff, but wanted to be able to live more low impact lifestyles. So we spent a while looking for a site. We identified a site about 2.5 years ago in Bishopston, which is where most of us are either living or working, but was the sort of central point of where we were looking, because most people are living there or working there. And yeah, we're going through the design process at the moment. That's going in for planning this autumn. So yeah, I guess we'll see how that goes. I guess we'll talk about some of the challenges or barriers maybe. But yeah, it's an exciting time, and we, with the help of Jonathan and Cwmpas, applied for funding through Welsh Government, and we were one of the first community-led groups to access funding through Welsh Government through their Land and Builders Development Fund. And I'd say throughout, like, Welsh Government have been very supportive of community-led housing in general, and we felt our project. So yeah, that's been really positive, and it's allowed us to, rather than do everything on a shoestring, trying to do absolutely everything ourselves, to get in the professional like consultants, architects, all of that you need to get through a planning application. So yeah,
really good to hear that there is that sort of supportive ecosystem developing, and we'll hear a bit more about some of that. But you mentioned, Adam, the kind of housing need that so many families are experiencing. Tell us a little bit about that from your perspective. Why are people not having their needs met by the housing that is available? What are the stories that these families were telling you, and your own story?
Well, my personal story is, I guess that the housing that we are trying to provide housing for everyone, but I guess social housing is providing for a certain section. But there's a lot of people in that sort of middle ground who are working but still aren't able to afford housing. And that's across the board. That's not even just in rural areas, but especially in rural areas where wages are lower and house prices are higher. It's almost impossible for young families to settle, even if people have grown up somewhere. And even if people's parents are quite wealthy, that's what we've found with people coming along and say, that's not been our membership so far, but people have come to the consultations and said, like, we've got a big house, but that doesn't mean our children are going to be able to live here. And so I think that's why community-led housing in rural areas has really taken off, because a lot of people are seeing rural communities becoming, the average age is going up and up and up, and no young families are moving in. And so, yeah, it is across the board. And in Swansea particularly, like, renting is rocketing. I think I saw, like, last year, asking rents went up by 20% in a 12-month period, which is just insane. So people aren't able to rent, aren't able to buy housing. And also, even if you can afford it, the insecurity of it, I think, on average, during the time we've had the project in the last 4 years, most people have had to move maybe 2 or 3 times. Like we were served notice on a house for no fault. They just wanted to do the house up and ask for more money 5 days before our first baby was born. So served 3 months notice just before the new rules came in. We had to scrabble to find somewhere to live, ended up moving somewhere else, was served notice after 2 months, had to find somewhere else to live. Luckily now we're somewhere where we've got a bit more, renting somewhere with a bit more security. But yeah, I think, and I think that's not an unusual story. I think that's what's really sad about it, is that's what a lot of people in private rental are facing, and I know that the rules have changed and you have to be offered 6 months. But even that is not enough to have the security to form a life.
And people want to be rooted in a place and feel like they are there for the long term and not have that insecurity hanging over them. Absolutely. And on a practical level, Adam, can I ask you about how you have acquired the land? Do you own this piece of land in Bishopston? Was it easy to find a site that was suitable for the project that you wanted to deliver?
Well, no, it wasn't easy to find. It's very hard. Obviously, that's the reason we've got a housing crisis, not because it's impossible to build houses, it's because land that's acceptable to planning is in short supply. But yeah, we've identified the site, and quite often what happens with community land trusts is a landowner came forward who they wanted to sell a piece of land. They wouldn't sell it to a developer because they live in the area. They wanted to support the project. Yeah, they want money for it, but they're supportive of our aims. So we've got a legal agreement on the site, which gives us the time to go through planning, raise the funding, which is key really. It's not always, for community-led housing, it's not always about getting land cheap, although that is a route a lot of groups use, but it's about having that time, because you can't compete on the open market. You don't have that cash in a bank account that you can take a risk on a piece of land like a developer. So having either a supportive landowner or the local authority who are willing to give an exclusivity period or some sort of options agreement is really key. If you look at all, 90% of the successful projects, that's how they manage to do it.
Really interesting. Yeah, the importance of those supportive landowners and what is the role of local authorities in some of this as organisations that do own land. Thanks so much for sharing that, and really great to hear that you guys are on this journey. But it sounds like you've definitely got your work cut out, and it will be great to see this come to fruition and more projects like it start to happen. And Sarah, I'd like to come to you next to pick up on some of this from a Pembrokeshire perspective. So your role is Community-Led Housing Development Officer. Is there a lot of community-led housing happening in Pembrokeshire? And does Adam's story resonate with some of the examples that you're working with?
Hi. Well, I mean, from my experience, and hello, Jonathan. Jonathan's been in the game a lot longer than I have, and started off, helping and supporting the first two CLTs, one at Solva and one at Knowlton and Roach, which you're still involved with, I believe, Jonathan. And my role really is quite recent. So I'm learning from those which have gone before. The ones which we're focusing on at the moment really have been providing housing as part of redevelopment schemes or conversions with mixed uses, and are quite small. The ones which most recently I've become involved with have involved, interestingly, a community which has got real fire in their belly, which I think is in this absolutely critical, essential part of any successful CLT or, community-led housing, whatever form that may be. You need to have a group of very determined people, because it's not an easy ride and it doesn't happen quickly. I'm sure Jonathan will support me, that there are many hurdles to climb, but the first one and most important one is to engage with your community and to establish what the community wants. It's no good going in there, as an advisor or anybody really saying, I think this is a good idea for your community, because that's not going to go anywhere. And the important thing is that all the communities are different. They all have different needs. They all have different objectives. The groups are all unique. And whilst there may be a general progression of work that needs to be undertaken, you can't say, right, well, once you've done step one, you could do step two. I mean, you can obviously, you can't start building until you've got planning. You know, that's an obvious one, but there's lots of other things, you know, iterations of planning, taking account of new legislation or planning requirements which are thrown your way, availability of funding, you know, the appetite of the local authorities, the appetite of the Welsh Government here, as far as we're concerned, the availability, particularly in Pembrokeshire, of money through the taxation of second homes. We have a policy for that now, which has upped the council tax by 300% to those properties, and the ability to ring fence that, particularly for housing. Whilst the theories there, sometimes it sort of slips into different areas from those from which it's actually been gathered, and we're banging the drum with the county council about that one. Fantastic to see that as far as planning is concerned, we've got CLT specifically mentioned in the national Welsh policy guidance, and also down here in Pembrokeshire in the Pembrokeshire County Council Local Development Plan revision, and also in the Pembrokeshire National Parks Local Plan. So that's all positive. And the important thing, I think, from our point of view, is that we get all the right people together around the table. You know, we've got planners, we've got housing people, we've got building control, and then we've got funders. So all of those need to be on the same page, supporting the actual CLT and what its objectives are, not the other way around. And I think that's the key message that I want to get across. And with that in mind, we are going out to community councils and telling them that this is an option, but also being realistic.
Yes, interesting. So yeah, a real team effort, as you've described, a real team of supportive experts able to advise all these different types of groups that might emerge and be interested in pursuing a community-led development, and engaging with community councils to inform them about this as an option for providing housing or creating housing in local places. And thank you for shedding a bit of a light on some of that regulatory and planning policy framework as well, Sarah. I will bring Jonathan in next. You've been mentioned twice. You must be a real expert in all of this, Jonathan. And Adam certainly was appreciative of the advice and support that you have been able to offer. So on behalf of Cwmpas then, as the community-led housing advisor, what would you like to say about why this is such an important direction forward, and where you see the real opportunities to scale this as an approach and as a solution to our housing challenges?
Thank you, John. Yep. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I think it's the community-led housing approach. Obviously, with Cwmpas, then in terms of the remit we have on the Communities Creating Homes programme across Wales. And if you, I suppose, an analogy for the role that Cwmpas plays would be very similar to what they have as the community-led housing hubs in England. So we perform that kind of role then in Wales in terms of then that, if you like, initial engagement in communities when communities want to invite us in to have a look at the opportunities, how then we can then work with those communities if there is traction there in terms of that organisational development, to explore the kind of considerations there. What are the options? What is the right solution for that community? Because, as you know, community-led housing is an umbrella term. It covers a multitude of different variations on the theme. Sarah's obviously mentioned community land trusts, you have co-housing organisations, you have cooperatives, you have tenant management organisations. There's a whole raft of organisational structures that sit under that umbrella term of community-led housing. But I think the key two key elements that come out of that is that they are legal entities. Beneath that, then they will formally constitute, whether as a community interest company or a community benefit society or as a cooperative and so on there. So I think that's one of the first building blocks, if you like, to get that organisational development correct and in order, because obviously with that then comes the opportunity how you can access different sorts of funding, whether it's private funding or potentially what limited elements of capital grant do go into community-led housing. And then obviously then it's making sure then that irrespective of the model, that there are certain characteristics that come in it. It's very much community-led, by the community, for the community, with the community. Secondly, that it has to be then have some sort of stake going forward of that community organisation going forward, whether in terms of actual legal ownership of the homes or some sort of stewardship or management around those homes. So there is a stake in it going forward. Thirdly, that it's important then that there's a recognition that it's the collective benefit. So how that organisation works is for a collective benefit rather than individual personal gain in that regard. And it's really then what happens with any surpluses, if you like, that are generated in time by that organisation. And also key is then that the affordability is kept in perpetuity. So at first occupation of the new home, but also then subsequent occupation of those homes. And Gower obviously there developed some quite innovative models there through a shared ownership process, where shared ownership would normally see you staircasing out of and into full ownership, and therefore the loss of the affordable home, whereas Gower have looked at mechanisms then to protect that affordability and in perpetuity going forward around capping the staircasing. And also to make sure one of the things that is important is that any models are replicable across the piece, in that whilst there will be variation to the geographical or social context in which you operate in, that those models have general themes and continuous, constant factors that can be applied across the board there, of community voice, community control, and community engagement at the heart of it. I think then Sarah's touched on obviously the game-changing planning policy Wales changes in February in terms of recognising community-led housing as part of the affordable housing delivery. I think the commitment of Welsh Government is strong. It's in the programme for government to look at these opportunities, and it is being backed up by elements of capital funding, as Adam has outlined there, and the Gower success in achieving funding through that route. I think then obviously the kind of support then that Cwmpas can provide across the piece in that organisation development and that end-to-end development process, type work and working way through the development process. Another building block is the commission now that Welsh Government have put in place around community ownership of assets and community-led housing as part of that. Our programme manager on Communities Creating Homes at Cwmpas, Casey Edwards, sits on that commission and give evidence to the Senedd committee that formed the basis of launching that committee, and all about access to land, access to opportunity and so on there. So it'll be interesting to see what falls out of that, whether legislation falls out of that, as per like in Scotland with issues and considerations around community right to buy that is there, where if an asset comes up that's in perhaps public ownership, that the community have the first choice on it. But I think as well the most important thing is, and I think Adam has touched on it and Sarah's touching it as well, is that fundamental energy and dynamism that comes from the community, and then the group that coalesces around that issue to provide affordable housing in those communities. The energy is quite incredible. I never fail to be in awe really when I go into a meeting with Adam and his colleagues at Gower, with Leonie, Adrian, Noel and the team there. I can see Pat on the call, Dando. The energy there, it's actually quite humbling when you go in there, where people are looking to try and find these solutions to what are absolutely fundamental issues around housing, because housing is the foundation for so much around health, well-being, your education prospects, your employment prospects. It's such a fundamental core of life. So I think, those would be the kind of considerations with. It's a healthy pipeline in Wales. We're looking at potentially about a 280 home pipeline across Wales. No discernible pattern, urban, rural, semi-rural, all with affordability crises at their heart. and then variously compounded by second homes issues, say accessibility to affordable housing, and perhaps in certain areas issues around culture and threats, if you like, to the Welsh language and Welsh culture.
Really interesting to hear all of that. Really interesting to hear about Scotland's community right to buy on pieces of land, because it's those kind of structural challenges to the market forces that we really need, isn't it? Market forces are not serving our well-being, and we need to find those really structural and significant changes to shake up that market for land and make it possible for these committed groups of citizens to take control of what is fundamentally a shared asset, our land. So it's really interesting to think about the need for those big economic arguments.
It could be interesting to see how the Commission pans out on that, whether the appetite is there to put some sort of legislation in place, like you see in Scotland, because I think it just would release some of the blockers. And don't get me wrong, Welsh Government are very supportive and so on there, but I suppose they are the policy makers as well. But equally then, with the funding for the actual programme the Cwmpas delivers, yes, there's Welsh Government funding to the roles in the programme, but also Nationwide Foundation, and they are fundamentally interested in looking at those step change or those systemic change that you're alluding to down there, in terms of how can you break the barriers down, get rid of the blockers to delivering more affordable housing. So Nationwide Foundation, across the projects that they do in terms of actual projects on the ground, research or facilitation services, they're absolutely committed to that systemic change in the system and what that takes, whether that be legislation or how you can make those step changes in the planning system and so on there.
Yeah, really important. And as Adam had already said, these community groups and groups of families just can't compete on the open market with developers and large companies who are banking land. And then community developments end up happening on leftover bits of land that no one else wants, which is not good either. So really knotty problem. And I'm going to come to Leonie next. Interesting, isn't it, to hear Adam's journey and Adam's story and trying to do this in Bishopston. But Leonie, you and your cohort have been working on co-housing as a potential solution for quite a long time, because you are really awake to this housing need, particularly in the urban areas of Swansea. Can I ask you, Leonie, to talk a bit about that need? What is that need for a new approach to housing, and why do you think co-housing could offer the solution?
Well, very quickly, just to define co-housing a bit, it is a model that started in Denmark about 60 years ago. People started coming together and shared facilities, have their own house, but have a shared common house where people could have meals together, shared gardens, shared nursery spaces for children, workshops, whatever facility that community chose. And it's generally in groups of 20 to 60. And this model has spread around the world. And there is quite a lot of co-housing happening in the UK. And I recommend having a look at the UK Co-Housing Network website, because they've got a whole directory. Now, for us in Swansea, we've met all the hurdles that Adam talks about, and what Sarah was saying and what Jonathan was saying about actually identifying the barriers, for each community is really important. But co-housing has tended to be very middle-class white, because it's mostly older people who are financially able to fund these things. Yet the model of co-housing, that social connection, that kind of sense of belonging, of having a purpose, being appreciated and valued within your community, is really fundamental. And where Swansea co-housing is different is that we're really passionate both about intergenerational co-housing, which is of course what Gower are doing too, but also about regeneration. So taking houses that exist and giving them new purpose, new life. And some of those can be historic houses, but it can also be old warehouses, old shops, old, you know, we need to be creative. And I would argue that Mayhill would not have had a riot if we'd actually been able to, well, if those young people were feeling connected to their community and felt valued. There's that wonderful proverb that says it takes a village to raise a child, and the child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth, which is said to be an African proverb. I would argue that we actually can really enhance community. We really need to ignite the various passions and skills and you know, the light. There's so much wasted talent in Swansea. And so I would argue that anybody who can pay rent can get a mortgage, can become an owner. Now, what UK Co-Housing Network says is that the essential values, there's more and more, there is a model of providing social housing for older people, social housing, a model like the McCarthy and Stone model, where people have shared facilities and it's older people. And to some degree, that has been effective. But as people age, they tend to fragment and you know, there's no way of really bringing fresh life back into those communities. And so I would argue that we, you know, that there's this term called placemaking, which is about how do we bring that sense of connection to communities. And it is through shared facilities, but it also needs to be people who want to make it happen. I mean, one of the things about co-housing has been the intentionality, and you can't, you know, force people to connect if people are really in the habit of isolation. So what are the things that can help develop, build that kind of connection? And what are the kind of models of living that allow people to be where we are, see what is around us, and remove the barriers to co-ownership? You know, instead of having one of these houses where tenants are all tossed out because the owner wants to sell, how do we help those tenants co-buy if that is, you know, if they want to? How do we get, you know, the pension funds to help support, underwrite, people to come together so that people with assets can actually hold the mortgage, help hold the mortgage for young people to come onto the property market. HMOs, there's a co-housing group in Swansea that are more HMO in that everybody's got their own room, and the co-op owns the building. That's another form of ownership. You know, if people have that sense of, yes, we are the owners, the directors, we renovate this house, we know how to do everything that it takes to have a good house. That's another model of secure housing that, you know, instead of having HMOs with anonymous landlords, what would it take for people to be able to do this much more easily? So, you know, I think there's many ways of facilitating that sense of connection and ownership. And I would just love to see us identify the barriers and start to find ways of scaffolding, helping people to move in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And you raised a lot of interesting ideas there, Leonie. Thank you. And particularly about those challenges that we have in some of our urban communities. And yes, you're right. HMOs are a form of co-housing in that people are living together, but who owns the asset and who has the power? And are they exacerbating inequality in our society and our economy, rather than giving people ownership of their own well-being and their own assets? And yeah, a little shift in that ownership model would really change the dynamics of communities and offer people that sense of long-term security, and putting people's well-being above the speculative property profit mindset. Yeah, powerful stuff. And I'll come to your colleague next, Adrian. I'd love to hear from you. So as a group, Swansea Co-Housing is trying to push things forward here in Swansea. Give us a bit of an update on what you're currently up to.
Yeah, so I'd start by saying Leonie's done a really good introduction to what we're about. And she mentioned placemaking, and she mentioned the sort of the renovation and bringing back into use of existing buildings, or change of use of existing buildings. I'll just say a little bit more around that, in the sense that we really believe quite strongly that the sense of place is really important to the well-being of a community, and the sense of place is rooted in the history of that place, where it came from, how it's established, its past industries, its past residents, the people who lived in those buildings and the people who built them. And so by looking after that built heritage, we can actually maintain the built environment as it was intended to be, and enhance upon that, and maintain that sense of belonging, sense of community, that's so important to having ownership, having a positive mentality in the neighbourhood. So the other thing there is in terms of the health of the residents of these buildings, assuming we've still got, and particularly looking at housing stock, assuming we've still got these older houses of Victorian, Edwardian, potentially older buildings, they're of traditional construction. There's been a lot of damage done over the last few years, decades really, since post-war, essentially, by using inappropriate materials, maintaining them. And that's not just bad for the building. It's not just a pity because we're losing architectural detail. It's actually fundamentally damaging to the health of the people living inside. You put impermeable materials on these buildings, you get damp, you get condensation, you get all the health effects that go with that. And so by looking after the buildings, by promoting the skills to look after them properly, and I may be singing to the choir here where Adam's concerned, we can also look after the people inside them much better. In terms of where we are, what we're doing at the moment, we are facing a lot of the challenges that Adam referred to, actually, in terms of finding a site and lining that up with the finance in what's a commercial market. The typical cycle that we witness is that a building will sit on the market for sometimes years, massively overpriced, and there's no feasible way we can do anything with it, or anyone else really, at the price that's being asked, and it sits there, and then suddenly the seller will drop the price by 50% or more, at which stage the site immediately gets snapped up by a cash buyer, and sometimes then gets developed, quite often to lowest common denominator standard, sometimes just sits around until they put it back on the market, trying to make some money out of it, and the entire cycle repeats. And as a fairly small organisation with volunteer effort, it's very hard to maintain a state of readiness with these things continuously while they're at the overpriced stage, in order to be able to essentially have the finances and everything lined up and the feasibility studies done to jump in and be alongside that cash buyer when the change happens. So any modification of policy in Wales, as Jonathan was talking about, even if it was just ex-public owned assets or ex-community assets, would be helpful in terms of giving the community a first right of refusal or similar on those places. So very interested to see where that goes. While we're facing those struggles, I'm finally going to answer the question I was asked. We are continuing to build up the knowledge-based skills base and to engage in this arena. So a few of the things that have been going on recently, it's a year ago now almost, that we had someone over from New Zealand, Robin Allison, over from New Zealand, to talk about the Earth Song co-housing there, which was a really interesting event. Quite a few people came along to, and she's got a book out if anyone's interested in sort of digging into this in more detail, really going through that process of setting up that project and what was involved in it. There's also a video on our website. So if anyone wants to watch her presentation, you can go to our website, go to the news page, and you'll find on one of the more recent news articles, there's a video linked, which is her presentation that she gave a year ago, and we've now got permission to share. So that's really worth a watch for anyone who's interested in how these things pan out in the real world. And we've attended a few other things around the sort of the heritage area. The TUI Centre did an event with a lot of exhibitors back in May, which a couple of us went along to. That was really interesting and made some good contacts there. On the policy side, observationally, I was just talking about looking after our buildings properly. Just an aside, but there is some new policy that's come out, a joint position statement 2022 by the RACS and the PCA, the people who generally do damp proofing and stuff, on doing this properly. That's an aside in terms of engagement. Policy engagement, we've been doing actively some stuff around Swansea Council and community asset transfer. So they had a scrutiny inquiry on that a few months ago, to which we and a few other organisations put in responses, and then went along to their council meeting following that, where they were reviewing them. It would be fair to say I don't think the council are hugely keen on making dramatic changes to the way they do things. But it was interesting that the points that we as Swansea Co-Housing were making were very much backed up by the other responding organisations external to the council, pointing out that other councils in other parts of Wales and the UK have much more positive policy in this regard, in terms of the initial view of proposals. And really calling for better points of contact, better laid out process, and more opportunity to get involved in that. Also making the case that while these are publicly owned assets the council's talking about, and there's an argument that the council is just a custodian of those assets, that word custodian is quite fundamental. A lot of them are not being looked after well under council ownership, and therefore would serve the community better if they were actually transferred to the third sector. So that.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Adrian. I think that's really important work that you guys are doing in amplifying the issue and, you know, responding to these inquiries with the council and really advocating for these new models, because I think lots of people aren't thinking creatively about these sorts of solutions to disused buildings and, as we've said, to the housing crisis in general. And that role of placemaking in urban settings in particular, and presumably across the whole piece, but where we have old buildings falling into disrepair at the same time as people in desperate and urgent need of housing and secure, safe, sustainable housing. You know, it's just unpacking those barriers. And even in rural towns like Haverfordwest, there is a real move towards turning old buildings into giving new life to old buildings, and great housing need in Pembrokeshire. And how can we look at those urban sites before we lose those buildings and that built heritage completely, bring new people to live in towns? That helps the local businesses within the towns as well, if you've got more population density, and breathe new life into these high streets and built environments. Jonathan, that's so important, isn't it? That placemaking role and different ways of thinking about how we regenerate our local places.
Yeah, that's not it. Yeah, I think that the placemaking concept, if you like, and community-led housing, you know, very, very much aligns and, you know, almost go hand in glove with each other, because, you know, community-led housing is all about connection, social interaction, fundamental community engagement, community delivery, community involvement, the environment, the quality of the spaces. You know, Leonie's talked there about the co-housing principle, both as a design concept, but also as a social concept, a social model, and around quality of life. And I think then when we take that then into two further areas, then is yes, like Adam has talked about a site particularly that Gower are taking forward, but Adam and the Gower team, like the Swansea co-housing team, like the work we've done with Dando and so on there, acknowledges that the site is though part of place, and place is made up of a series of layers. So like when Adam talks about Bishopston, yes, there will be the physicality of that site there, but Gower absolutely get that Bishopston is made up of social, economic, cultural traits, features, etc. That makes place. The site happens to be in that place. So therefore, those two would come together, and that's what makes a place and the richness of that experience. Following on from that then, where placemaking and the approaches there then go to then, if you like, create those conditions, those physical conditions, those social, economic conditions, cultural conditions sometimes, that then allow those people who live in those places and enjoy those spaces that are created, allows them to thrive and the communities to thrive and flourish going forward, and so on. And then one final observation on that then, where community-led housing then feeds back and from into placemaking. Community-led housing, yes, there's an event and an activity that creates the homes, but more importantly, community-led housing is about how it's done and how we design those spaces and the processes that are in there that go into creating strong, cohesive communities that are vibrant and healthy in the broadest sense. So I think it's the how in many ways is more important from a community-led housing point of view than the what. Don't get me wrong, the what is very important in terms of providing those affordable homes, but it's how it's done, which is a very different and unique way of approaching delivery of affordable housing.
Yeah, that's an important point. The ways of working that are embedded in these new models. So we've talked about, the importance of people and that dedicated group of people who are in it for the long haul. We've talked about the policy framework and the importance of changing that framework to combat those market forces. We've talked about the placemaking and how this is key to creating those vibrant, cohesive communities for the long term. And then the process of how it's done, how inclusive it is, and how empowering it is, and how we really are being community-led by the people who want to create these homes in the places where they live. So really fantastic discussion. Thank you all for your input. Now, Pat, your project has been mentioned a couple of times on the call already from Co-op Dando, and I think you wanted to come in with a comment.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting hearing everybody. And also, I mean, we're kind of Cardiff based, but also prepared to move more widely than that. So it's just to hear, I mean, I think there are possible ways it'd be really useful to keep in touch with people after this. So we're a group, some people in the group had a go at co-housing a few years ago and got stuck in some of the difficulties, and we just ended up living in a similar area. And now we've picked it up again, and we're interested. We're kind of on the process of kind of firming up the group and working out what our mission we're in that process. And we've also been working with Cardiff University and done some events on community-led housing. Adam's come and talked. Hi, Adam, which has been brilliant, and Jonathan's helped us as well. So that's where the name checks come from. But the thing I wanted to ask, or kind of, I'm not quite sure how to ask it, but this was about, the green economy. And I think what Sarah said, that all the groups are different, and I mean, that's part of the strength, is that we're all a bunch of people in a locality trying to figure out some way which that particular group, will serve the needs of that group. And also, I think it's interesting where it's about regeneration, where co-housing may have been more possible for kind of older people with homes and that, but actually all the groups I've talked to are interested in intergenerational stuff, and where we're trying to address, I think community-led housing's got the opportunity to address quite a whole range of issues. And I think we've particularly been talking recently about the economic stuff, and several of us are very interested in growing. And one of the problems before with the co-housing was trying to get a place where you've got some land, so as well as getting somewhere where you can do housing, you've then got a whole set of other planning stuff to be able to get land. And we're interested now in doing something on the boundaries, on the fringes of settlement. So there's the possibility of getting land, because what you can also do then is be trying to find a way of providing housing for people who want to work on the land, because that's one of the things that makes it so difficult for Wales to move towards sustainability in terms of food production, is that, you know, the rural places are too expensive for people to live, and people need to be living where they're growing. So I suppose what I wanted to ask was, given that all the groups are going to be different, you know, with aims that have grown out of the very particular place, the particular town, the land that we're on, how do we bring that together to be a movement where, I mean, there is support from Welsh government, but councils, I think, you mentioned it's very difficult getting councils on board and finding even a way of talking to them. And in the events we've done, it's been really difficult getting people from the council and the planning to come to them, you know, housing associations as well. But just, you know, there's something about getting a kind of coherent message between us so they can't avoid it, so they can't stay away. And that's a bit of an incoherent question, but I'd just be really interested to hear any thoughts people have got on that.
Yes, I would welcome any response from the room to that question. How can we collaborate better across this piece? What is needed? Yes, Sarah. Are you able to unmute there?
Okay, right, thank you. I feel your pain. It's certainly something that there's a lot of groups going through. Like I said, I'm quite new on the block, but I am banging a very loud drum down here in Pembrokeshire. And for example, I attended developers it's a planning meeting, but it's not a meeting as such. It's developers forum type of thing in the council offices yesterday, which was attended by private individuals, planning consultants, etc., and also representatives of the planning departments that cover Pembrokeshire. Housing association reps were there, building surveyors, you know, quite a wealth of professionals. And I've taken that opportunity to suggest that we go along and give them a short presentation at the next meeting to educate them. And similarly, again, we're doing the same thing with a group which is already set up within Pembrokeshire County, which gathers all the community councils together, or at least gives them the opportunity to attend these meetings and to engage with them. We're meeting with portfolio holders within Pembrokeshire County for housing for the communities, and also the leader of the council. And when we met with the leader, he said, well, you know, what exactly do you want me to do? And I just sort of said, well, you could knock a few heads together. And I think, you know, it's that sort of approach that, you know, we certainly can do here in Planning in our small way for Pembrokeshire. And Jonathan and his team are doing that within Cwmpas. But you guys on the ground, you've got your elected representatives, and go and wind them up. And knock on their door, send them letters, you know, get little campaigns going, or big campaigns. You know, don't hold back. Just get out there and start screaming from the rooftops.
Yeah, be noisy, I think is what you're saying, isn't it?
And annoying. Be annoying.
Be annoying.
Always engage in any consultation whatsoever, like with the replacement local development plans, if they put supplementary planning guidance out, etc., or any other consultation that a local authority or even Welsh Government put out, engage in it. We constantly look to do that. Plus, when then speaking with the registered social landlords, try to, and as Dawn and Zoe will know, that's the background I come from, is to get into the question, what's in it for them? Because that's the question they will ask. That's the question they ask me when I go in there. What's in it for us? You know, and things like that. You know, ourselves are community-based organisations. They are fundamentally founded in the community. They have an asset in the community, both in terms of people and property. So what's in it for them, how to turn that story around. And with the local authorities, yes, to emphasise the benefit that community-led housing is part of the solution to the affordable housing. Nobody's saying it's the silver bullet, but it's part of the solution. But there are wider benefits around health, well-being, even social care and so on there that come to the fore there in terms of what can be brought there. So it's rather thinking about the long term rather than the immediate. And I know that's difficult in a local authority concept with tight budgets, etc. But try to emphasise that by doing this now, there are longer or medium-term benefits to be had.
So that was Jonathan Hughes, Community-Led Housing Advisor at Cwmpas, a key point of contact if you're interested in any form of community-led housing, and he's there to advise. Leonie, what did you want to say about how we can continue to amplify this mission and build the movement?
I mean, it seems to me a top-down as well as a bottom-up movement. It would seem to me a renewed opportunity at the moment with a Labour government that's committed to seeing a lot of housing built, but they don't seem to realise that we also have a lot of unused spaces and that could be used, and that it is about community ownership. So I'm sure that if the government said, you know, we are going to include these things on the agenda, and intergenerational and the social connection model, the placemaking model, that the local council would have to comply, surely. And as well, but to me, it's also that thing about how do we get the message across? I mean, Wales really knows what community is about still. There is still a memory of it. People say, you know, there were the days when we used to walk to the beach from Mayhill and we had music and there was all these wonderful, vibrant things. That memory is still there. How do we reawaken it so that it's also a bottom-up kind of call, you know? And yeah, I like people's thoughts on that.
Thanks, Leonie. Yeah, it's rekindling what we used to know about how to live better together, isn't it? I'd like to come to Adam for your final thoughts here, Adam, before we bring this call to a close. What would you say to someone listening who might be considering starting a community-led housing project or aspiring to a co-housing way of life and thinking about this as a solution to their housing challenges? What would you like to say to someone who is considering this way forward?
If I can just answer the question from before, just really quickly. I think it's interesting looking at like the community land trust movement and how it's just risen from really nowhere in maybe 10-15 years in the UK, especially in England. Like, we're in Wales like quite far behind, but like it's gone from almost not existing as a model to being like the predominant form of community led housing. And I think that's partly because it's a coherent model, and the Community Land Trust Network and other people have really banged that drum. And I think that it's just got it into the conversation. You know, people, you know, in government, in councils, they know what a community land trust is. And so I think just the more people selling the message about community-led housing in general and the different models, co-housing or cooperatives, the better, really. It just needs to be at the forefront of people's minds, and we need successful examples of people doing it, and we need people who are lobbying local government and national government to just really push that message out there so it can't be ignored. And yeah, what would I say to someone getting involved? I guess it is a lot of hard work. Like it's a lot of hard work, and it takes a long time, and it will take a long time and then more on top of that. So I guess just sort of get comfortable with an amount you can invest into it. So, you know, if you can say, oh, I'm going to invest 3 or 4 hours a week and just I can keep that on for a couple of years, 3 years, then that's better than putting loads of time in, getting really excited at the beginning and burning out and then not being able to carry it on. And sort of, I guess, enjoying the process of learning as well. Like it is hard work and sometimes I get frustrated with it, but actually organising as a group of people is a really beautiful thing. And I've seen met with a lot of community land trusts or board members from community land trusts, and they've always said, like, you know, we started the community land trust because we needed new housing in the area, or we needed housing ourselves, but actually we've now got this vehicle, this amazing organizational structure, and that they can tackle loads of issues. A lot of them are looking at like community energy, and become quite radical. You get a lot of sort of people in the WI and who've sat on the, you know, community council for years, become like pure like anarchists calling for like community power. And I think that, like, yeah, just enjoying that process of organising at a community level as well, because it will be a lot of hard work, and if you don't, then you won't be able to keep it up for the amount of time you need to.
Great advice there. Thanks, Adam. And yeah, I think that's right. There's so much exciting stuff happening across Wales at a community level, and food, energy, housing, transport even. These are examples of challenges that communities are taking head on, and it's an exciting community to be part of. So if you're listening to this and thinking about your own long-term housing need, and you think you might like to get involved in this space, we've had some great thought leaders on the call today, and people that you can reach out to just start those conversations. It's really something we'd love to see so much more of happening right across our region and across Wales. And this sort of feeds into two of our big upcoming events here at For the Region, where some of these conversations hopefully will continue. We haven't got so much into the sustainability of these housing schemes in terms of their green and eco credentials today. But Leonie, you've raised an important point there in the chat about the skills that are needed, engaging with builders and developers, and building that pipeline of green construction skills in our local and regional economy. And that is what we are going to be talking about at the Green Economy Conference on the 19th of November. We're aiming to have a whole zone dedicated to sustainable construction as part of that event this year. And we'll be engaging with the RSLs and the construction sector, hoping for a whole system conversation around sustainable and green construction. And let's make sure there's a loud voice for community-led housing in that meeting as well. So that's on the 19th of November in Swansea Arena. On the day before that event, we're hosting the Wellbeing Economy Festival of Ideas, the first of our All Wales events, in partnership with the Future Generations Commissioner. And community-led housing and co-housing are well-being economic interventions. They're a disruption of traditional market-led approaches to housing, and definitely fall under the umbrella of Wellbeing Economics. So we hope you will all engage with Wellbeing Economy Cymru in for that All Wales event, also taking place at Swansea Arena, and that's on Monday the 18th of November. So that's 2 days in November, back to back. The only place to be is Swansea Arena for the Wellbeing Economy Festival of Ideas and our regional Green Economy Conference and Exhibition. This has been a really fantastic discussion. I have gained a lot of insight and another piece of inspiration of how we can empower communities to solve challenges for themselves, and the massive changes that are needed to enable this to happen at scale. Thank you so much to all of you for sharing your expertise and insight. I think it's been a really valuable conversation and very inspiring to hear from you. Adam will be all watching closely, I'm sure, and willing you on to make sure it's a successful project here on Gower. That's all from me for today. Thank you for everyone listening in to this conversation. And we will be having a series of roundtable discussions over the next few weeks, which you can find out about at fortheregion.org.uk. But for now, from me, that's all. Goodbye. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you so much.
Everybody.
Thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much.